Welcome, everyone, to the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville. My name is Kevin, and this special week on the Orville, we're going to be discussing our crew profiles. We've been continuing a really fun podcast here, talking about all the main cast members and the crews on the Orville here. And this is Union Federation episode 213, and we are discussing Lieutenant Commander Bortus, played by Peter Macon. And I came prepared. I'm wearing my Latchcomb 2418 championship t-shirt. So just want to let you know, if we're going to be playing that game over some type of alcohol, I may win. So I'll let you guys know that. Anyway, let me introduce the rest of my crew here to the Union Federation Starship. Here with me, as always, is, of course, our first officer and counselor and founder of the BQN. Please welcome Miss Amy Nelson. What's going on?
Well, hello. Yes, you did come. I need a mitt because that's what I fear is going to happen to me.
You can't wear anything on your hands when you play Latchcomb. You got to be. It's like a hot potato. You got to keep moving it.
Yeah.
All right. Also with us here is my co-captain, security weapons officer, and failure at any type of Latchcomb that he plays is Mr. Kyle Wagner.
There was two things before we get this podcast started tonight. First and foremost, I am doing this podcast under protest because one of these episodes we are talking about, I had actually put in some great mental blocks about things that we see in that episode. And Kevin has reopened and cracked through those mental blocks, and I will never forgive him for it. Number two, it is also very fitting tonight, one of the episodes that we talk about an honorable mention, because it involves one Dolly Parton who about an hour ago news broke her husband of almost 60 years has passed away.
Oh,
rest in peace. Yeah,
yes.
We're gonna definitely mention some Dolly in this one, so definitely. Well, like I said, this is Union Federation. This is the Orville Crew Profiles, ongoing mini podcast series here discussing the Orville crew members and the actors that play them. And this is Lieutenant Commander Bortus, played by Peter Macon, episode 213 here on the Union Federation podcast and the Fandom Podcast Network. And we got some codes here, guys. Check this out. You scan that right there. You'll go ahead and go right to our website. Yeah, UPC codes, not UPC codes. The what do you call these again?
QR codes.
QR codes. Thank you. I'll get that in my head there. But yeah, check that out. Give that a little scan there and go to our website. I appreciate that. So, and of course, the BQN. Also, you can find these podcasts at BQN. So make sure you check that out. We are discussing the Orville, discussing all the crew members, and we're going to go ahead and get into it here, guys. Now, if you haven't already noticed that we've been going steaming along here with the Orville crew profiles, and previously and coming soon to the Union Federation, we of course our first one that we did was Alara Katan, and then we did Lieutenant Talakiali, and we went on to John Lamar, and then the last episode we did was of course Gordon Malloy. Coming up after Bortus, we've got Dr. Claire Finn, we've got Isaac. We've also got Kelly Grayson, Ed Mercer, and also we'll be ending out the series with our special guest stars and Star Trek alumni that have been part of the Orville. Look forward to that. And of course, recently on the Union Federation podcast, we gave our spoiler reaction to the newest Star Trek movie, Section 31. And last year, we rounded out the year. We did an awesome return, final season of Star Trek Lower Decks of season 5. And we also did return to Star Trek Next Generation, where we covered every 2-part episode, which was a lot of fun. But let's go ahead and let's get into our first Orville shuttle mission. All right. Of course, we are talking about Lieutenant Commander Bortus, played by Peter Macon. And a little bit of information about him. First of all, we'll let you guys know the episodes that we're going to be discussing, because we usually highlight 2 episodes. Sometimes we have an honorable mention. The 2 that we're going to be highlighting is Season 1, Episode 3, About a Girl, where Bortus and Clyden debate whether their newborn child should have a controversial surgery. Then we have Season 2, Episode 2, Primal Urges. The crew race to save a small group of survivors on a planet which is about to be destroyed by its son, but really the real story is Bortus's sex lagoon. So we do have an honorable mention too. That is Season 3, Episode 8. It's a Bortus and Kelly episode. Very strong, very strong episode. Made me cry. Midnight Blue, where the crew visits a Venus sanctuary world to embark on a journey that may leave the Union more vulnerable. Let's get into a little opening discussion here about Commander Bortus here. Bortus was a Macon second officer and lieutenant commander aboard the USS Orville. According to Admiral Halsey, Bortus served on the Orville under previous captain George Griffith as second officer prior to Ed Mercer assuming command. Bortus mated Clyden in 2413. They lived together in the Orville with their son Topa, prior to Topa's transition back to female in 2422 and the couple's separation. Got some pictures here. Love Bortus with the mustache, and of course he got addicted to cigarettes. We found out that Mocklins lay eggs. I think it was about like 20 days, 30 days, something like that. I just want to get your guys' opening comments on Lieutenant Commander Bortus. Amy, let's start with you.
It was interesting watching just these episodes and then remembering that from the Malloy episodes, Bortus and Clyden had a smoking addiction.
Yeah.
And now we're getting an additional addiction with the same characters basically. And I wonder if that's intentional. If it wasn't, they really should have done something about it. I feel sort of bad for them that we're getting such the negative, stereotypical human problems, right?
Right.
And so that was really stood out to me. But as far as they go, especially Bortus, he's our comic relief. He's the funny one. He's the one-liner, straight face. Great, I think, with the crew. I especially enjoy him and Commander Grayson. I like their relationship as well.
Kind of a cross between Data and Worf,
Uh-huh.
certain personalities in that as well.
Yeah.
Kyle, what is your opening statement or observations about Lieutenant Commander Bortus?
Well, I had some early observations about Lieutenant Commander Bortus, but then the greatness of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer helped me change my views on Lieutenant Commander Bortus. Bortus is the straight guy on the ship. I mean, but it's in the way the Orville works, he's the straight man and he's still funny because of how they play off things. But I think Bortus is probably, when you go through the Orville, he's one of the more polarizing characters, and not because he's a bad character, but because of his culture and his background being so what it is. I think he makes for some of the more powerful episodes when they focus on Bortus. But it's also interesting because I think you brought it up a little bit, Amy, with the issues of addiction, and you wonder if that's also that those addictions come from the background Bortus has on his home planet and their customs, and maybe some of that is what makes him addicted to certain things he probably would never have been exposed to otherwise. And I have a small bone to pick with Miss Amy too before we get too started. You mentioned last week, you talked about how it was so unhealthy for Malloy with his holodeck situation. I think Bortus is much more unhealthy.
Dr. Claire straight up calls it a porn addiction. So there you go. Yeah. I'm really surprised when I was looking at this episodes and recalling several of the other ones. Bortus was kind of like the Data in TNG. And as I also mentioned, Worf, because he got a lot of traction in a lot of episodes. If his character wasn't, the A plot, he was definitely part of a lot of the B plots. I don't know if you guys noticed that or not. And also, too, the alliance, or as we learned out later with the Mocklins, because they were part of the Planetary Union. Then we find out later on that they get rid of them for the reasons that we'll talk about later. Mocklins were huge part of the Orville story thread out throughout the entire series. They got a lot of burn. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
I think so, and I think because of the situation, especially in season 2 and season 3, with the conflicts and what the Mocklins represented to the Union, I mean, they became an integral part of of the storyline of the political games that were going on, and how, I mean, there's a whole deal with it about how the Union kind of bowed to the Mocklins, even though they knew so much of what the Mocklins did was wrong, but because they felt so necessary to have the Mocklins be part of their alliance, and it had the power that it gave the Mocklins kind of over the Union for a good while.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. They kind of became a sign of bigotry and masochists and stuff like that, and we're kind of a mirror to a lot of bad parts of our society, and having to deal with a society like that, and we'll get more into that later. But what's interesting though, let's go back right now to the first two couple episodes of the Orville. And when the Orville was being kind of teased to us before it started to air, a lot of people were thinking like, wait a minute, is this kind of like is this a Star Trek parody? Because it's Seth MacFarlane, he's a funny guy, and we got a lot of jokey jokes throughout the first season. Then it kind of started to take a little bit of a serious turn, but there were still jokes. And the first 2 episodes had a lot of that. But then when it came to the 3rd episode of season 1, which we are about to talk about here. Oh, wait, Admiral's Log. There's that guy again. Look at that. Admiral Halsey. But let's talk about a Girl. This is where things took a turn, and we'll talk about that. But first, Amy, go ahead and give us the Admiral's Log for About a Girl.
Alrighty. Well, this is season 1, episode 3. When Dr. Finn refuses Bortus and Clyden's request to perform sex reassignment surgery on their daughter, a standard Mocklin practice on the rare occasion a female is born, they petition Mercer to order the procedure. Mercer refuses, and he and the rest of the crew object to performing such a procedure on an unhealthy infant. Bortus and Clyden arrange to have the procedure done on a Mocklin vessel. Bortus changes his mind after watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Clyden wants to proceed, revealing that he was born female. The case is arbitrated on Mocklus, where Grayson represents Bortus. Grayson disputes male superiority by demonstrating Alara's immense physical strength and Gordon's lesser intelligence. Mercer locates Havina, an elderly female Mocklin who testifies about living a secluded but happy and fulfilling life. Under the male pseudonym Gondas Eldon, she becomes an esteemed author on Mocklus. Clyden and the tribunal are unconvinced, and the infant undergoes the surgery. Despite their disagreement, Bortus and Clyden remain committed to giving their son, Topa, a good life. Now, the viewership, even though About a Girl was the first episode of the show to air in its new Thursday night slot, it was watched by 4.05 million television viewers in the United States, the 3rd highest for this season overall. The episode commands a 7.9 rating on IMDb, the highest rating in this season until then.
There you go. All right, let's get into some trivia here, guys. And Kyle, I'm going to have you start us off with the first bit of trivia.
Well, the first 4 episodes in season 1 were to be directed by veteran Star Trek director Brannon Braga.
Yeah, he's Star Trek royalty for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, we've talked about this in the past when we were comparing Star Trek TNG episodes with Orville episodes. Give us the next bit of trivia.
Yes. Well, this episode bears many parallels to Star Trek TNG The Outcast, which was in 1992, including its ending.
Yes, it was. All right. I found this interesting, guys. So Lieutenant Commander Bortus' home planet is based on Norilsk, Norilsk, an overpopulated Russian city north of the Arctic Circle. Watching the video here, I'm showing you the real city of Norilsk here and where it's located. And I got some information about this. Norilsk is the northernmost city in the world. The city of 176,000 has been recognized by environmentalists and even by the Russian government as one of the most polluted places on Earth because of one business, Norilsk Nickel, the world's biggest producer of palladium and high-grade nickel and a top producer of palladium, cobalt, and copper. Built as a resource colony by prisoners in the Soviet Gulag, Norilsk outlasted communism, embraced capitalism, and now it aims to ramp up production to sell the metals needed for electric vehicle batteries and the clean energy economy. Norilsk Nickel is the world's leading producer of the high-purity Class 1 nickel that electric vehicle industry leaders like Tesla CEO Elon Musk are seeking. The company's ambitions coincide with those of Russian President Vladimir Putin for greater development in the far north, which he maintains can be accomplished sustainably. So I thought this was very interesting, guys. If you look at the map up here and see where it is high up there. But yeah, if you look at the pictures, you can see why that Mockless was, to made it look like that. Because if you that scene when they're flying over Mockless there, it's like really, polluted, and they almost get there's like a lot of weapon testing and stuff like that there. So it's pretty intense. So yeah.
Wow.
Okay, guys, we got some. Yeah, Kyle.
I was just gonna say, after all that information, I need you to have a new pair of pants ready for me.
Yeah. We're kidding. No, I'm not. All right, we have some notable guest stars here. Of course, Chad L. Coleman is Clyden, Dobea Oprea is Captain Vorik, Rena Owen is Havina, Lamont Thompson as Kabrick, Jonathan Adams is Mocklin Arbitrator, and Antonio D. Charity is Advocate Cagus. A lot of Mocklins going on there. So, guys, let's discuss about a girl here, guys. Kyle, I know we've talked about this in the past. I'm going to get you started. This kind of let us know that the Orville is for real and can be serious.
This was the show that changed the game for the Orville. Let's be honest here. We all thought it was going to be this spoof show. The first couple episodes kind of made us feel that way. This show blew everybody's mind, and I think even here on Union Federation, we told everybody, watch episode 3 of the Orville. Your entire preference and how you look at the show will change. And everybody I've talked to who's watched episode 3, they all had the same reaction. The first 2 episodes are okay. It's a little spoofy. I don't know. Watched episode 3 and they were blown away by it. And I think the biggest thing about this episode, obviously it's an incredibly powerful episode, but nobody saw this episode coming. I mean, I remember when we first talked about it, how blown away we were that they even hit this topic so seriously, so intelligently, with a level of dignity as well. And it's a great performance by Peter Macon as Bortus in this episode, because you can really see the conflict in him. And also, as much as we want to say we hate Clyden, you have to give some love to Chad L. Coleman for the performance he puts in as Clyden. Almost in every episode he's in, but especially in this episode when you find out he's keeping the secret that he was born female as well and had to undergo the surgery. So he has a very different perspective. But I mean, again, the great thing about this episode was it's such a heavy topic, but they had a little fun with it too. Obviously, with the whole Rudolph joke, with Rudolph being what changes Bortus's mind because his deformity led him to greatness, and just the powerfulness of it, especially when they find the female Mocklin and they find out that she has been one of their greatest writers and influencers, and the shock it puts them in. But in the end, that's what's so amazing about this episode. In the end, though, it doesn't sway decades upon decades of Mocklin belief, and Topa still has to have the surgery. Now, obviously, they address that issue later in later seasons of the Orville, but you just remember when you're done with this episode, you're almost a little bit speechless because it was so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said, Kyle. It's interesting too. I remember when this episode came out, and I remember doing a social media post saying, "Wow, the Orville just got real." And I remember you probably felt the same way. Your thoughts, Amy?
Yeah, talk about a very poignant and timely topic to be discussing. I really feel that they talked about it so, as you said, intelligently, and are really focusing on how can you change this generational idea that is based off of them and others, like us and them. And was like, we are all human beings. Can we get to that as our common denominator? That's what I would like us to see. And I feel like they said that so beautifully. And like you said, lightheartedly with Rudolph, but my gosh, how poignant. I didn't know that's why I liked the story of Rudolph until, oh, yeah, that's why, So that possibility, don't take away the future of this child, it's just, and they were both being the best parents that they knew how to be. But, oh, Kyle.
You saying that too, Amy. Another thing I thought they did actually a good job of addressing this episode too, because Ed actually had a moment of conscious. Are we right to put our ethics onto another culture?
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm glad they did that, because there's a point to that too. And again, that's what makes this episode so great and so intelligent, because it didn't just take one angle and run with it. It looked at it from all the different angles, because you have to ask yourself that question. Are we right to take what we believe in and try to force it onto another culture? And I think they handled that, all the aspects of it, beautifully and balanced, and so well balanced to where it wasn't insulting to anybody. And it really, again, it come out of this episode and it really made you think. And that's, I think, why this was such a important and powerful episode for the Orville.
Agreed, Kyle. Yeah, it was it was an emotional gut punch too. But what I really find interesting about this episode is that we learn about Clyden's past, how he used to be female, and he had the surgery as well. But when Bortus has that eye-opening moment with the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer thing, what's interesting is when he's on the opposite side of this now, and he and Clyden are butting heads against this. But then what happens is that the child gets, Topa gets a corrective surgery, well, depending on who you ask, and then is turned into
surgery.
Yeah, exactly. But what I find interesting too is this lays the seeds for the resentment that starts to build up within Bortus towards Clyde. And we're going to get to that in the next episode here, talking about Lieutenant Commander Bortus here on the Orville crew profile. Let's get our Admiral's log here for Primal Urges, which is the next episode we're going to discuss. Amy, go ahead and get us going here.
All right. Well, we are in season 2, episode 2. And the crew race to save a small group of survivors on a planet about to be destroyed by its sun. The Orville spends time observing Nixia, a planet being consumed by its expanding red star. Bortus often leaves work early and avoids his mate Clyden to secretly spend time in pornographic simulator programs. Fed up, Clyden seeks to divorce Bortus via the Macon custom of killing a spouse. Bortus survives, and to avoid Clyden being prosecuted, both agree to marriage counseling with Dr. Finn. Bortus reveals he deeply resents Clyden's altering their child Topa's gender without Bortus's consent. Later, the Orville initiates a rescue operation after discovering survivors beneath Nixia's surface. A computer virus from Bortus's porn program infects the ship's computers, hampering the rescue. Bortus and Isaac lead the evacuation, rescuing 30 individuals before the planet breaks up. The computer virus, now controlling the ship's helm, steers the Orville toward the star. Isaac neutralizes the virus, and the Orville escapes the star's gravity. While Mercer is furious over Bortus's poor judgment regarding the porn simulator, he commends him for his role in saving the Nixians. Bortus and Clyden agree to resolve their conflicts and spend more time together.
That was a tough call. There was like only 70 something survivors, and they had to basically do a lottery, or only 30 could go. And as I have a picture here of their leader, she elected to stay behind. That was a tough call there. So yeah. All right, well, let's get into some trivia here. I'll go ahead and get it started here with the trivia. This parallels with Lieutenant Barclay's addiction to the holodeck in Star Trek: The Next Generation's Hollow Pursuits, though it's more of an escapism mechanism for him, and his pornographic element is strongly implied throughout the 20th century Star Trek, when networks rules forbid stating this outright. So yeah, some entertaining episodes there for Mr. Broccoli. Kyle, go ahead and give us the next bit of trivia here.
In this episode, we're introduced to Lieutenant Unk, a large creature of unknown alien species. Unk does not wear a uniform or clothing of any kind while on duty, putting him in violation of the Union rule against bare feet in the engineering section, which Ed mistakenly believed was Directive 38 in the episode Firestorm.
Also, he is the guy that provides the porn for Bortus. He's the porn dealer.
Some good pills, apparently, too.
Yes.
Exactly, yes. Amy, go ahead and hit us with the next and last bit of trivia here.
Well, the tense music when Isaac and Bortus move from the shuttle to the underground facility is highly reminiscent of the score from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when the Reliant and Enterprise are engaging.
There you go. All right. Of course, some notable guest stars that we have here. Of course, we have Chad L. Coleman as Clyden, Kelly Hugh as Admiral Ozawa, Leslie Farah as Minister Thies, and Mike Henry as Dan.
No, that's Thies, not the long S, the short S.
Thies. Didn't I just say that?
Guys, we got a podcast to do. Can we just worry about that later?
Now, before we talk about Primal Urges, we did want to let you guys know there was an honorable mention that we wanted to talk here. And we also watched this. And I bawled my eyes out watching this episode. The honorable mention is season 3, episode 8, Midnight Blue. We were calling this the Bortus and Kelly episode, where the crew visits Havina's sanctuary world and embark on a journey that may leave the Union more vulnerable. And of course, that's the one where the female Topa, who gets to meet Havina, is abducted by the Mocklins and tortured because they're trying to find the underground railroad of the women that Havina is secretly transporting out of Mocklus to their sanctuary. And that's also when they have the big meeting, of course, council meeting as well. We get, of course, the wonderful appearance by Dolly Parton when Havina gets to have a conversation with her, but they, of course, then bring the bruised and battered Topa to the council. And that is when the council decides to reject Mocklins as part of the Planetary Union. And then, of course, things get tense. And also, too, Clyden returns in that episode, too, and has a little redemption arc here. And he sees the error of his ways. And they both renounce their Mocklin citizenship and decide to stay on board of the Orville. So definitely a good episode there. But of course, we get Dolly Parton. It's great. So yeah,
one of the best episodes of the Orville, and also one of the longest episodes of the Orville.
Yeah,
right. Almost 90 minutes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Primal Urges, guys. So I want to start us off here real quick because this episode was uncomfortable for a lot of people here, obviously, because they touch on porn, and porn addiction, which not a lot of shows do, especially science fiction shows. They kind of dance around it a little bit, like, of course, as we mentioned with TNG, they get right into it here. I mean, even the scenarios that Bortus goes into, where he has the sex lagoon, he has the naughty doctor, he's got the dungeon thing going on. I mean,
the prisoner. Yeah.
Yes. He's really got some interesting, fantasies going on there. But as you see the show and the episode going along, and Clyden is demanding to him to spend more time, Bortus is finding any way to, lie to him and say, no, I got these job duties I got to do. You just can tell that Bortus is not attracted to Clyden. He has nothing he wants to do with him. And he's getting his, what do they call it? The sexual, what do they call it? not the mating, the sexual encounter. They call it something when they mate, basically, or when they have sex. There's a phrase that they have, and I'm forgetting it at the top of my head right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the
It's
sexual
like the sexual appointment or this it's something
something.
clinical like that.
Yeah. So, but it's you start to
The
see
sexual event.
Thank
Yes.
you, Kyle. The sexual event. You can see where the problems that they're having, and Clyden pretty much says, "Well, I'm going to divorce you, and the way that we do that is by killing you." And of course that does not fly on Union Federation starship, as we see that as well. And we start to learn more about the Moclan procedures and cultural and stuff like that, and it's pretty hardcore on more than one level here. So I remember when this episode came out, there was some negativity about this episode, and maybe because people felt comfortable watching it for reasons and stuff like that. So I want to get your thoughts, opening thoughts here on Primal Urges. Amy, start with you.
Yeah, it definitely was uncomfortable when I saw. I was like, "Oh yeah, this episode." And you're right. It is just very in your face, and these are the corny scenarios that I guess are out there. I don't know if talking about it this openly, I don't know. It is uncomfortable. And you can see I like how it where Bortus he's lying. Like he's lying to everyone.
Yeah.
And so you really can feel how isolated he is. And it goes back to about a girl. And so I wish they would have addressed that issue a little bit stronger and like longer and cut the first part out where it's like, people when they don't when they suppress their feelings, it's gonna come out in probably negative ways or ways that aren't productive or efficient. And here's one way that this happened to Bortus. And maybe it's because of he has this addictive personality that it's like, well, one or two
That's a
times
good point.
for a regular person would be fine. That would help them, go through and process. But for Bortus, if he's got this addictive personality, which Dr. Finn said was like 10 times what humans experience. So anything Bortus does, he's got to be very careful because he now has this addictive personality.
Yeah. Kyle, what say you?
So I am in agreement. This is not one of my favorite episodes of Orville, just because it's not so much. There's some uncomfortableness to it, but it was just so much they play. I'm with Amy. They played up on the porn addiction side of it. I think a little bit too much. I get it and why they did it, because Bortus not only susceptible to addiction, but here's a man who probably feels like he failed his child. He is not attracted to his mate right now because of what happened. So he's looking for refuge in anything, and he finds it through this porn addiction. And that's the thing. I think all of us at some point or time are guilty of getting ourselves trapped in a fantasy world, whether it's pornography, something else, to escape our own realities. And sometimes we get a little bit, and we sometimes get a little bit too lost in it. And we have some, if we're lucky enough, we have people to pull us back, or we're able to kind of snap out of it and realize that. In Bortus's case, you're talking about compounding his feelings of failure as a father, his feelings towards Clyden, his feelings over what happened to his daughter. I mean, it's not surprising that he gets shocked like this. And again, because of what he's been through, and he's feeling so alone and isolated, he's going to in the most extreme route till he feels something, anything. And in this case, it's through this porn addiction. And it does open up a lot of points about, and I like how it does continue on with what happened in About a Girl and the fallout from that. But it also shows too how selfish Bortus can be at times, and he is, especially early early on in the run of the Orville, because Bortus has a tendency at times to put his own wants and needs ahead of everybody else, no matter if it's good or bad, and then he faces the consequences later. I mean, at the end of this episode, he talks about resigning, but because of his actions saving lives, Mercer kind of gives him a bit of reprieve. But there's a lot of places that would have been like, hell no, you almost killed us all because of your own addiction and own problems. You are no longer fit for duty. You're done. And so it also tells you the kind of Captain Ed Mercer is, to understand that there's more wrong with his crewmen than what there is. Even though he's angry, he also knows that this person is a good person and is a hero who's going through something. And I think in this case, in this episode too, is that, you know, one of the things that always stood out to me with this episode, even in the first viewing, Clyden was so fed up before he knew about the porn addiction. He stabbed Bortus for a divorce before he knew about the porn addiction. So that's I think that's kind of an underrated missed thing in this episode, because what would have happened if Clyden found out about the porn addiction before he stabbed Bortus? He probably would have stabbed Bortus multiple times, saying this divorce is happening no matter what. So I think it's a lot of interesting things, but it's also, the other thing is too, is I think this is actually a very great moment for Dr. Finn too, because of how she's able to get through to these two stubborn ass Mocklins and make them realize some things.
Yeah, it's you know, I don't know if they needed to show all the 3 or 4 different like sexual fantasies. Also too, when at the what's that?
2 of them would have sufficed.
Yeah, agreed.
The other thing too that kind of bugged me at the end, and I know it was done for comedic effect, but for me it was just awkward effect, was when this planet is being destroyed and they're in the sex lagoon area in the computer trying to fix a virus thing, and then you got the holographic sex Mocklins coming over and like
grabbing Lamar.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just a little awkward there. I know it was done for comedic effect, but to me, it was just awkward effect. So, but what I do like about it though is that it does show, as you mentioned, Amy, a good call out is that Bortus does have a addictive personality. And it's just one of the things that I felt did add depth to his character. And as we go on, especially with the cigarettes that he gets addicted to later with Clyde, was a pretty funny side there. But you really get some insight to the relationship between 2 mated Mocklins, which is a big deal to kind of get that, and then in future episodes, we meet Bortus's ex-boyfriend, basically the one that Kiali ends up having a moment with, and so we get a little insight into that and what happens, and there's some similarities with any type of marriage between those 2, but usually divorces don't with humans don't add in death, but every now and then there's cases, but theirs was more ritualistic, which was interesting. So but yeah, it's not one of my favorites, but it is interesting because it kind of sets the stage for things to come. So there you go. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get into the next part of our show here. Next Orville shuttle mission. Let's talk about Mr. Macon himself. All right, guys. So let's talk about Mr. Peter Macon himself. Nice guy here. I've had a chance to meet him once. I'll show that picture later sometime. Peter Jared Macon is an American actor. He's best known for his role as Lieutenant Commander Bortus, of course, in the television series The Orville. Macon was raised in Minneapolis and attended North Community High School, where he acted in school plays. His mother was a teacher and his father was a truck driver. Macon later attended the San Francisco Art Institute and the Yale School of Drama, where he earned a master's degree in acting. Macon married Lucia Brawley, an actress who also attended Yale in 2005. Former New York Mayor David Jenkins officiated it. He divorced Lucia several years later, and in 2018 married Jacqueline Woods. A little bit of trivia about him. He worked on Family Guy as a voice talent for several episodes. He plays Malcolm in September 2002. He played Malcolm in Medea, Macbeth, Cinderella, musical by Bill Rausch and Tracy Young, adapted from Medea by Euripides, as translated by Paul Roche, music and lyrics by Shashir Kurup. He's done a lot of Shakespeare, basically. So obviously knows stuff. In 2015, he did Othello. So he's been around. He knows his stuff there. It says here, let's see, he did what was it? Oedipus? Is that how you say it? Oedipus at the Tyrone Guthrie Theater, Minneapolis, Minnesota. So he has a long line of acting, of course. Then he has a relationship through Family Guy with Seth. So Seth obviously says, we could use this guy for Bortus here. So I wanted to kind of get your guys' take here on the character development discussion that we're going to have here. So first of all, the first thing I have here is now the second question we're going to have is the relationship to the rest of the crew. I want to get your guys' take on Bortus's tie to the Orville universe as a whole. And then we'll get to the personal relationships in the second thing here. Bortus has got a place in history here, Amy. Let's start with you.
Yeah, well, we learn about Mocklins through Bortus, right? So the Orville universe would be, I dare say, 1/3 the size smaller. Well, no, you've got the Krill? Is that their names?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Krill.
Yeah, and then I was thinking the Kalons. So, it would be significantly smaller if we didn't have Mocklins. And I guess the biggest difference between Mocklins is just their tradition of always doing it the same way. Like the Kalons, they're the logical, and it's like you need to teach them emotion and reason. But the Mocklins, I think universe is tradition, and how do we break away from tradition? I think that's what Mocklins represent here, and we get that through Bortus and his lovely way of recognizing this is going to hurt my child. So maybe my thinking is wrong. We get that, and we get a way to break away from tradition. We're seeing this through Bortus. He definitely enhances the Orville universe greatly because of that.
Yeah, one of the things too that I find interesting through Bortus that and the relationship with the rest of the Mocklins too is how important in the beginning of the series that Mocklins are to the Union Federation. They supply the weapons and shield upgrades. We had episodes that talked about that. And one way or another, Bortus was involved with either knowing someone or just being part of the envoy, and also being shunned as well by Mocklins for having switching Topa back to female and stuff like that. So yeah, Kyle, what about you? His character ties into the Orville universe as a whole.
Seth MacFarlane did a really interesting thing with the alien races in the Orville, because I really truly believe he actually took the Klingon stuff from Star Trek and split them into two alien races, one being the Mocklins, the other being the Krill. And where the Krill are very religious based and believe stuff, that the Mocklins also are very stubborn, just like the Klingons are, with honor, but with their own traditions and their own, and locked into a belief system that is antiquated. Let's just call it what it is. It's an antiquated sexist society. And what Bortus does and why he's so important is because he really does stand up to his own people and changes his own beliefs, because he's very much believes, when the show starts, he's very much into the belief of what Mocklins is about and how he was raised. And it takes him having a daughter and having these other people who are from a different race influence him to see there are better ways. And even after that, he still has his moments of weakness and strength, both. And I think that's what makes him such a great character, is because we get to see both sides of that of Bortus. We see his flaws, we see his weaknesses, but we see what his greatest strengths are. And he does have a sense of duty, and he does have a sense of right and wrong. Even the people with the greatest sense of right and wrong go off the path every once in a while. That's what makes us living creatures. I mean, and I think that's one of the great things is Bortus learns and evolves. I mean, I'll throw it out there because you look at the Bortus we see in Midnight Blue compared to the Bortus we see in Primal Urges, and even some of the earlier episodes, and how much that character has changed, and the fact that they even kind of pull off in Midnight Blue a little bit of the Troy Wharf vibe with Kelly and Bortus there in season 3 as well. Maybe not to the full extent, but you see him evolve from being a hardcore belief in my people to being a father first and caring about his daughter and how much, and putting everything on the line for her. And you see those things evolve in Bortus. And again, just like Malloy and just like Lamar, another character that evolves and grows as the season goes along and as the story goes along. And that's what's so interesting about it, is all these characters grow in one way or the other, but they all have their own unique paths in the Orville. And Bortus is definitely very unique, but extremely important to the history of the Union and what happens to the Union during this time frame.
It's a good point. Yeah. So regarding his relationship to the rest of the crew discussion we're get into right now, I find interesting because when the series kind of starts, we of course get him and Clyden's relationship, and what we find out through later is we find out he's had a past relationship, but then we see Kelly Grayson kind of come into the picture. At first, he doesn't want to. First of all, he doesn't want to share a birthday with her. We learned about that. And that was kind of funny. And then we get teased that he's about to sing a song, and he doesn't, but then he does later, finally.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really Kelly Grayson character, because of how she takes Topa under her wing, that really kind of sets the tone for their camaraderie and their friendship. And there was a little kind of thing there in Midnight Blue where she gets injured. You're wondering, like, wait, are they going to kiss? And then something happens and they don't. But I want to start with you, Amy, the relationship that Bortus has with the rest of the crew members.
Yeah, it is mostly with Kelly. Because I'm trying to think, like, do they have some, like, guy time with Lamar and Malloy?
He's just kind of there, he's just kind of they have like the eating stuff in the cafeteria, which is kind of funny, but it's not, everyone's around the table, that's
right,
the bridge crew, so it's, except for the commander and the captain. But it's, I think the closest person that he is friends with, unless you count maybe the doctor a little bit, stuff like that. So, but that was kind of by necessity,
Yeah.
First of all, having the smoking addiction, and then of course, having to go through couples counseling after he's almost murdered for the divorce.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Him and Grayson, there is that mutual respect, and they seem at ease with each other, more so obviously than he is with anyone else. And that's nice to see. And so I'm hoping, and I wish that familiarity and that relationship that they share, that he could get that with others in the crew. I would really like to see that if it comes back.
All right. Kyle, what are your thoughts on his relationships with the rest of the crew members?
I think one of the more fascinating things about the Bortus characters, again, you go back to where he comes from, an all-male society, yet the characters he seems closest to on the Orville are the women on the Orville. He has, of course, the relationship with Kelly. He has I think he had a very interesting relationship with both Alara and Kiali in these. Maybe kind of a respect for their strength aspect of it, but they still seem to have, there was a mutual respect there. He obviously had an interesting relationship with the Doctor. But you don't see him interact that much with the male characters. He's kind of a comic relief side thing for Lamar and Malloy. You don't see him interact with Isaac that much. Really, Ed is probably the most male character he spends the most time with. And even then, there's a lot of conflict there because it's the conflict over the moral beliefs. And so it's interesting that here you have this character from an all-male society, yet his closest relationships on the show are with the women. And I think that, and I don't think there was something that they kind of played up or anything like that. It just developed that way. And I think it just was an interesting aspect to this character. And also too, I mean, I think across the board, even though they didn't agree with a lot of his upbringing and his beliefs, they had a lot of respect for Bortus as well.
Yeah. That's a good point. All right. Okay, so the last question that we like to ask, and this is always fun and interesting here, is if we had more episodes, because as of this recording, we have rumors that there's going to be a 4th season. Fingers crossed, we'll see. If we had more episodes with this character, where would you like to see their story arc go? Where would you like to see Bortus go? Now, at the end of season 3, we know that him and Clyden back together, of course, and they're raising their daughter Topa. They are no longer members, of course, of Mockless, and then we have the big battle. Isn't the Mocklins? Don't they join
the Krill
or the Krill or whatever it is? Yeah. So, if we had more episodes, what would you like to see from Bortus's arc? Kyle, let's start with you.
We talked about this. Goes back to our Star Trek 2-parters, because there's a 2-parter episode, or at least an episode here, where Bortus does go back to Mockless, and for whatever reason, something pulls him back to Mockless, and what he faces going back to his home planet, and with what his reputation is or something and things. And maybe it is something to where there's an underground movement going on Mockless to try to make change, and Bortus gets him pulled into that. But I think Bortus going back to Mockless is just like much like War, when Worf returned to the Klingon home planet after he had been dishonored and everything, even though he knew the truth. I think that's a storyline that really would be telling to see, and I think very interesting to see play out, is Bortus returning to Mockless for whatever reason that would be there.
Yeah. So at the end of Midnight Blue, the Planetary Union recognizes the sanctuary that Havina runs as their own kind of, I guess, world or country or whatever, and they are protected by the Planetary Union. However, there's still the issue of the females that do get born on Mockless, and I always kind of like, I could see Bortus becoming captain of a starship as well. That would be kind of cool. But I'm with you there, Kyle. I'd like to see him, and Havina work on kind of maybe changing the ways. Maybe there's an uprising on Mockless, both male and female, saying, no, we got to change this. This is not right. And it'd be interesting to kind of see that dichotomy. Maybe there's a civil war and it gets nasty. Or what's interesting. I know this is kind of funny and not funny, but remember in the beginning of Star Trek Undiscovered Country, what happens to Praxis when they overmine that moon? It explodes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, if their number one deal is weaponry, what if something horribly goes wrong and there's a planet-wide, I'm not saying like explosion or something, but that Mockless is now on the verge of not becoming their major export because it's now killing them, type of thing. And I think that would be a good way to kind of come in and reevaluate what Mockless is about. And maybe it does start the revolution, but it'd be interesting if that their number one export is weapons basically, fires back on them. so to speak. I think that would be kind of interesting. So, Amy, have we getting you anything to think about? What would you like to see from Bortus in future episodes if we get it?
Yeah, I like that idea of him going back to Mockless, and especially sort of him being that bridge to get Mocklin back into the Union Federation, right?
Yeah.
I could definitely see that and that political. And then, yeah, I said I would like to see his relationship with the others of the crew like get more individualized instead of just a group setting of where everyone is. Bortus is there too.
I gotta ask the question though, guys. After watching Midnight Blue, and obviously how Kelly is okay. Think about this for a second. So at the end of the series of season 3, we find out, first of all, we get a marriage between Isaac and Claire. We
Mhm.
find out that Captain Mercer has a daughter.
Mhm.
What does something possibly happen with Kelly and Bortus, or if things get weird between him and Clyden, or does she just kind of stay? Is she just kind of like the mom from the outside looking after Topa? I mean, would that be an interesting kind of story? I don't know. Kyle, you have some thoughts about that?
Well, considering that Adrian Padalecki has said that, got on record about maybe not returning for a full complement of the Orville, maybe that's why she leaves the Orville. The complications with Bortus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe because of things that are happening, the complications that happen with Bortus.
Well, she deserves her own ship too.
Well, but maybe that influences her decision to go after to get her own ship and captains,
right?
As well. So I think that could be a reason to explain her not being on a full season either. Just
what do you think about that idea, Amy?
Yeah, I didn't know that she wasn't interested in the full time. So,
Yeah, there's rumors that she may not return at all, but if she does, it won't be for like a ongoing series or ongoing full session series, whatever. So
yeah, maybe her and Clyden are representatives of the Union, and
yeah,
I don't know.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and wrap things up and get our final thoughts here on Mr. Lieutenant Commander Bortus. So, as I said earlier in the show, Mocklin's got a lot of burn throughout the episodes, whether it was the A plot or the B plot, and I think it got uncomfortable at times. But when I look at it, one of the most fleshed out characters is Peter Macon's Commander Bortus, and also excellently played by Peter as well. I got to say, got to put that out there. Very nice guy too. If you get a chance to meet him in person. But yeah, as we've seen, Mocklin's played a huge part in the plot threads throughout the entire series. Let's get your final thoughts on Lieutenant Commander Bortus. Kyle, start with you.
A character that I think is very honorable but flawed, and I think that it's a character who at times wants to drive us crazy, and we want to hate this character because of things he represents and things that he is. But then when we see the character really start showing some of his true colors as he learns and he evolves, Bortus becomes somebody we want to root for and care about, especially when we see how much of a father he is to Topa. And even though Topa has to go through some very difficult things, he stands by her completely. And I think that more than anything else through this run tells you about Bortus's character and the reason why we should be rooting for Bortus and in the situations. Even though he does get played for some comic relief, he has his flaws. I think that makes him so much especially as an alien character, makes him so much more relatable. And I think that's what we love about Bortus, is that here's somebody who is still a very strong character and very respected, but still has his flaws. And I think we see a lot of ourselves in Bortus in that, and realizing it's okay to have our flaws. It's what we do at the end of the day.
That's true. Amy, your final thoughts on Mr. Bortus?
Yeah, I love that he's third in command, and that he is so important. He's always on the bridge. He gives his opinion when asked. He's usually right, and because he is the one of the aliens on board, we get to really analyze, social issues like addiction and pornography and queer issues, gender issues. Um, so
It covered
we,
it covered the gambit for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
and
which is great,
it really
Yeah.
is. And of course, we can talk about it because, oh, it's over there at those aliens, we
Right, right,
can't,
right.
yeah. So Bortus and his character really gives us so much to chew on that's significant and important. And so it just makes his character so amazing. And you're right. Who's the actor's name? Chad, was it?
Yeah.
Chad
No,
Coleman, who plays
Oh,
Clyden.
Peter.
Peter
Sorry.
Macon, who played
Peter Macon, yeah.
Yeah, he is absolutely plays him perfectly. He gets into character, like Bortus. So really, really enjoy Bortus.
So when we were doing our season 5 wrap up of Lower Decks, Boimler was experimenting with his beard in it, and we saw it slowly starting getting bigger and bigger throughout the entire season. Should we have seen more Bortus with his mustache?
No,
No.
absolutely not. Nope.
I was like, nah, we're good.
The only time it would have been appropriate was maybe the episode about his porn addiction, because it was a pretty good porn stash.
Yes. Give you that.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and hit some subspace signals and let's tease what's happening next week. This is the Union Federation podcast, of course, here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN. But, guys, let's tease what's happening next episode. We are talking about Union Federation episode 214. We're doing our crew profile on Dr. Claire Finn, played by Penny Johnson-Gerald. I'm looking forward to that one. Love Penny. And the episodes, if you want to follow along with us to watch, the two that we chose, the main episodes, is season 1, episode 8, Into the Fold. That's where the crew set out to save Dr. Finn and her 2 sons and Isaac after the shuttle gets thrown into uncharted space.
That's our zombie episode.
What's that?
It's the zombie episode. Remember?
Yeah. And then we get the creepy spider characters in Shadow Realm, season 3, episode 2. The Orville explores a mysterious region of space, thanks to the Krill, but also we get to learn that she has an ex-husband. He's an admiral, and we get to meet him. And we also have an honorable mention episode that's worth watching, season 2, episode 6, A Happy Refrain, where Claire's personal life takes an unexpected turn, with Isaac. And Gordon makes an unusual grooming suggestion to Bortus. That's the mustaches, of course, referred to there as well. So make sure you guys check that out. Of course, as I mentioned, this is the Fandom Podcast Network. Hit our QR code there and go straight to our website. We'd appreciate that. It's the BQN. Amy, what is happening on the BQN and where can we find you?
Well, please find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at BQN Podcasts. And we are having our YouTube show, The View Screen, every Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific. We have got our Bargain Bin Gamers going live, and our Trexperts quiz is going live. We have a lot going on out there, so come enjoy us over on BQN.
And you can be found where?
Oh, yeah, at Counselor Amy on Blue Sky. Again, loving Blue Sky. Really, really fun.
Awesome. And make sure to also check out the BQN Facebook group you guys have there as well, right?
Yes,
so, yeah,
thank you.
Kyle, where can we find you, sir?
We can find me a lot of places, but real quick. Last week's episode, Amy was talking about how much she missed the Star Trek cruise and everything like that. Well, it was funny because 2 days later in the USA Today website, they had a huge article about the growing popularity of the Star Trek cruise, and it gave it national attention. So I just,
Really?
I think the article said it was only missing Amy Nelson, if I remember.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah. They were highly disappointed that the ship's counselor was not there to be interviewed.
Oh, darn it.
But you can find that online. I suggest going to check it out. As for me personally, where you can find me on the social medias, of course, you can find me on Facebook, all over the great pages of the Fandom Podcast Network. You can find me on X at AKyleW. You can find me on Blue Sky at AKyleW. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom, and you can find me on Discord at AKyleW as well.
Awesome. And again, we want to remind people too, we also have our Union Federation podcast Facebook group. You can also find Union Federation on X and Instagram. And also too, you can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Blue Sky as well. My name, Kyle, you want to say something?
And yeah, before you get into our wonderful TeePublic product, I believe Miss Nelson had something she wanted to add to the conversation real quick.
Yeah. So going back to your Star Trek cruise being mentioned, our co-host in Australia, in Melbourne, Davey,
yeah.
Trustbirds Quiz, said that it was on the news in Melbourne.
Nice.
The Star Trek cruise. He was at the gym working out, and he sees a little clip about the Star Trek cruise. So it's out there, guys.
That's great. That's my wife's hometown, Melbourne, Australia.
Right?
Looking forward to going back there. My name is Kevin. You can find me on X, Instagram, Threads, Discord, Letterboxd, and of course, Blue Sky at Spartan Phoenix. Make sure you check us out there. Anyway, and also, yeah, as we mentioned, to show support on TeePublic, you can get Union Federation T-shirts, and of course, any other T-shirts of our shows on the network. Hats, cups, all kinds of cool stuff there. We get a little kickback that keeps the Union Federation Starship moving. So we appreciate that. Anyway, I want to give a special thanks here, of course, to my co-host here, Kyle, and of course, Amy. Thank you, guys. Make sure you check out the BQN. And guys, thank you very much. Good job. One last thing, Kyle, go ahead.
Can I go watch the Luminaries now?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. They're so pretty.
They are pretty. Yeah, the space fireflies, basically. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, as we always say, live long and prosper. And we are, without a doubt, the weirdest ship in the fleet. We'll see you next time, guys. Thanks.